I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 35 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to Standing Order 108(2) and the motion adopted in committee on January 12, 2022, the committee is meeting on the inflation in the current Canadian economy. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are at their place during proceedings. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. The committee agreed that during these hearings, the chair enforced the rule that responses by a witness to a question take no longer than the time taken to ask the question. That being said, I request that members and witnesses mutually treat each other with respect and decorum. If you think the witness has gone beyond the time, it is the member's prerogative to interrupt or ask the next question, and to be mindful of other members' time allocation during the meeting. I also request that members not go much over their allotted question time. Though we will not interrupt during a member's allotted time, I'd like to keep you informed that our clerk has 2 clocks to time our members and witnesses. I'd now like to welcome today's witnesses with us here from Statistics Canada. We have Haig McCarroll, Director, Investment, Science and Technology Division. We have Heidi Erdl, Director of Consumer Prices Division. And also here with us today, Taylor Mitchell, Senior Economist, Consumer Price Index. And to round off the team, we've got Greg Peterson, Assistant Chief Statistician, Economic Statistics. And now Statistics Canada will have an opportunity for opening remarks. I understand it's Mr. Peterson will be delivering those remarks. The floor is yours, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Finance Committee members. It's a pleasure to be here today with our team. Since we last spoke to this committee in January, domestic and international challenges continue to impact supply chains and associated costs. We're all in a state of high alert due to the many uncertainties and risks around us. In this climate, Statistics Canada takes its job of anchoring Canadians to the facts more seriously than ever. Our Consumer Price Index continues to be a robust mechanism to gauge the impact of global and domestic events on consumer inflation and Canadians' changing consumption patterns. Lors de notre dernière présentation,
in our last appearance, we told you that the CPI increased 4.7% year over year as of November. That figure has climbed to 5.1% in January and 5.7% in February. We haven't seen gains this large in 30 years. The price increases are broad-based, with the biggest drivers being gasoline, food, supply chain issues, and a heated housing market. Allow me to provide some specific updates. Gas prices jumped almost 7% between January and February in the wake of increased demand and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Canadian motorists paid a third more at the pump compared to last February. If we take gas out of the equation, this February's CPI is a full percentage point lower. Grocery bills are rising fast too. We saw a 6.5% increase in January and another 7.4% in February. That's the largest year-over-year leap since 2009. Rising input prices and transportation costs are some of the biggest drivers, but 2021 was a particularly bad year for food production, which is where we often see climate-related impacts. I know this committee has concerns about housing affordability. Shelter costs rose 6.6% in February, the largest increase in almost 40 years.
CPI isn't even higher given these important increases. First, the index represents a Canada-wide average, accounting for all 10 provinces as well as the northern capitals. The CPI may not always match the exact experience of individuals, households, or even regions in Canada. This is because of geographic variations along with different consumer choices. We explained last time that the CPI is a consumption-based index that measures monthly costs of home ownership, including mortgage interest costs. It does not include the part of your mortgage payment that goes to principal because that's considered an investment in an asset, which will most likely appreciate over time. However, the CPI is influenced by the most recent housing prices and interest rates, and will soon introduce enhancements, which I'll speak to shortly. The CPI also factors in price increases in things such as mortgage interest. The CPI also factors in price decreases in such things as mortgage interest, cellular services, and car insurance, and childcare costs following the introduction of new childcare grants in certain provinces. And it factors in quality improvements in items that may be outpacing their prices. Statistics Canada is committed to keeping the CPI current and relevant. For our next release in April, a new data source for resale house prices, in addition to the new housing price index, will be used in the calculation of mortgage interest cost. This change will improve the timeliness and coverage of resale housing prices in the CPI. We're also sharing best practices and aligning with international bodies on how to approach the measurement of housing in CPIs and looking at how to leverage our other housing indicators. Expenditures of used vehicles are already at CPI, with new vehicle prices serving as a proxy. We'll soon publish our plan to introduce used vehicle prices in the CPI, and here we'll be inviting user feedback. On June 15th, we'll conduct our annual update of basket weights used to calculate the CPI. Looking ahead, the CPI is likely to remain elevated. Fears surrounding the global oil supply sent oil prices soaring in early March when Russia's invasion of Ukraine escalated. We're expecting higher gas prices to have a significant effect on March's CPI unless a situation changes quickly. The crisis in Eastern Europe could also affect prices for appliances and electronics as key raw materials get more expensive and supply chain pressures increase. Finally, since Ukraine is a major exporter of grain and vegetable oil, lower supplies of these products and international market and shipping disruptions will likely raise the prices for many everyday foods. But with that, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Peterson, and thank you to the Statistics Canada team for joining us for the second time. You are a very important organization, and we thank you for the very important work that you do. I know the members have many questions. We're now going to go into our first round of questions. In this round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions, and we're starting with the Conservatives, and we have MP Albus up for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the team from StatsCan for being here today. Please pass on my best to the Chief Statistician. One of the things I was hoping that we could discuss today was, inflation. I don't think that there's any issue that affects Canadians' financial health than inflation today. And your presentation, sir, illustrated many of the challenges that Canadians are facing. So as the basket of goods used to measure CPI has changed since 1991. It says here in the parliamentary briefing note that the highest levels we've seen the highest levels since August 1991. Now, it would be helpful to my constituents to have an apples-to-apples comparison when discussing how we track inflation. Would you be able, sir, through Statistics Canada, be able to, I don't expect it on the spot, but would you be able to please provide the committee with an analysis that measures what the rate of inflation would be in the CPI basket from August 1991 versus the one that you prepare for Canadians on a regular basis?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that I completely understand the question.
So the question is, the basket of goods has changed. Could you go historically back to where the basket of goods would be for 1991, the last time it was this much, and measure how much inflation would be today? You've said, where is it here? In your statement, we haven't seen gains this large in 30 years. The price increases are broad-based, with the biggest drivers being gasoline, food supply chain issues, and a heated housing market. So would you be able to supply a comparable that if we were to look at the basket of goods that people would have had, would have utilized, your predecessors would have utilized in 1991, could you measure what inflation would be on an apple-to-apple basis?
I'll turn to Mr. Ertel for sort of technical details on how we would do that, but certainly we could take a look at sort of any distribution of goods and take a look at how the price has changed over time. We do regularly update the CPI basket, as most countries do on a regular basis. For the past couple of years, we've been updating it annually, and we do this in order to kind of respond to the changing consumption patterns of Canadians. But if what you're looking for is a kind of
well, there's lots of people that have experienced inflation when it was back in the 90s, and I think that many people would like to know what would be the rate of inflation using that old measurement. But speaking about international comparables, et cetera, it's my understanding that both Japan and the United States use a rental equivalent approach. Now, you've mentioned in your presentation, sir, that there is going to be a new approach on housing. Are you going to be looking to countries like the United States and Japan for best practices when it comes to reporting housing? What are you proposing, and where are you basing the best practice on?
We are taking a look at sort of the data that we use in order to calculate the mortgage interest cost. By including both new houses as well as resale houses. The whole issue of how we measure housing is a discussion that a number of national statistical offices are having. We aren't proposing to move to a rental equivalence model similar to what the United States, the UK, and other countries do. We're looking at we're doing what we're currently doing, but we are, working with other countries to see sort of moving ahead whether or not there are better ways to do that. Many other countries are sort of actively looking at how they're dealing with housing prices, and we'd be remiss if we weren't part of that conversation.
I'm very happy to hear that. In British Columbia, we are seeing a case where, in many cases, rents are skyrocketing, the practice of rent evictions, et cetera. And so it's not just drastic housing price inflation that we've seen in Canada through much of the government's policies, but we're also seeing rents as well. So how are you going to better capture those increases in rent with utilizing this new method?
Well, we already capture increases in rent. When we take a look at shelter costs, we do break out both owned accommodation as well as rental accommodation. And you are correct. We are seeing sort of high increases in sort of rental accommodation. Latest numbers point to a 4.2% year-over-year increase. Rented accommodation accounts for about 6.6% of our current basket. So yes, we are keeping track of changes in rental housing costs, and we'll continue to do so.
Considering the divergence between housing prices and the consumer price index, does the current user cost approach used by Statistics Canada still reflect the actual cost of housing ownership?
I think it does. And I think it's important to make a distinction between kind of indexes of housing prices and what we do in the consumer price index. If I take a look at the good work that CREA does in its housing price index, and the great work that TerraNet does in developing their housing price index, they're measuring the price to purchase a house. What we're attempting to do in the consumer price index is measure the cost of owning that house. So conceptually, we're looking at something that's a little bit different. We are currently reflecting kind of the increase in housing prices, both in the sort of mortgage interest costs as well as in the sort of home replacement cost, and we'll continue to do so.
We're moving to the Liberals and MP Chantal for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much to the Statistics Canada team members. It's really important to say clearly just how important your work is. You ensure that we have the right data and therefore plan the right policies. Thanks for all that work.
One in English and one in French. Your February release, CPI, notes that the rising price of fuel are really affected by the geopolitical conflict in Eastern Europe, namely Ukraine, and also the Middle East. Can you elaborate on that?
Maybe if I can turn to kind of our lead analyst, Taylor Mitchell, who can talk about kind of the supply chain effects on fuel.
Thanks so much for the question. So oil prices are certainly, gasoline prices here in Canada are certainly primarily impacted by international dynamics for oil. And currently we are contending with both supply and demand factors there. In terms of supply, we've seen OPEC Plus keep oil production at levels lower than we saw pre-pandemic. We saw those initial cuts implemented in the earliest days of the pandemic maintained. And we're also seeing demand as economies ramp back up as COVID restrictions have been eased. That's been further exacerbated by events, geopolitical events in Eastern Europe. As we've seen those conflicts ramp up, we've seen ongoing concerns about oil availability, which has had an impact on prices.
Yeah, and could you elaborate on how this impacts also on transportation?
Well, gasoline is gasoline is a component under our transportation component. Can you perhaps clarify the question?
Yeah, I just wondered, we see a rise of inflation in terms of different buckets of goods, but mainly also food. And I wondered, we know that climate change has been a factor. Wheat caused by the war in Ukraine has increased also. But what's the factor in food price, for example, that is caused by fuel and transportation?
Thanks for the question. So there are certainly a number of factors that influence food prices as seen in the CPI. As you mentioned, they're very closely, they are certainly influenced by weather patterns and the ability to produce food. One factor that we're also seeing impact food prices right now is transportation prices, which are very much linked to gasoline and diesel prices. But because there are a number of factors that do influence food prices, it's not possible to easily decompose the exact impact of transportation, but it's certainly a factor.
Merci beaucoup. Ma deuxième question.
Thank you very much. My second question will be in French. The last Consumer Price Index figures show that the cost of telephone services continues to drop year over year. So I'm interested in hearing why. What's this phenomena? Why are these dropping? Thank you for the question. Any factor in the CPI is measured using the same product over time. For example, let's take a specific cereal, a box of cereal.
Box of cereal, we're going to adjust the price given the change in weight. C'est la même chose avec les services de télécommunications.
Same thing for telecommunications. Throughout the pandemic, a number of telecommunication service providers did things like raise their data plans, for example, how much data they provided in their plans. So consumers basically received more services for the same price. So when we see that, we adjust the price to the service, and that's what brought it down. All right, I hadn't quite understood that the costs, certainly in my family, we didn't see telecommunication prices fall by much, but it's true that you have included the fact that we are getting more services for that same price. So that's part of your calculation of the CPI, if I understand correctly, and helps you compare the costs of telecommunications. Yes, indeed. We're looking for a price for the same services in the next year. And while I have you, you did mention reduced, well, you were mentioning a cereal box earlier, but one of our concerns, of course, is that we can have the same product, but that there's less cereal in that same box. It still costs as much, but there's less in the box, even though it's the same price. So that, too, is something that we see in inflation, is one of the ways we see inflation ourselves in our households. So how do you get hold of all that information to run a proper calculation? When we measure the basket,
sort of supermarkets and grocery stores. And we get from these scanner tapes the product that's being sold, including the volume of the box or the weight of the box. So we will adjust that purchase to a standard weight so that we're comparing apples with apples over time. So in that particular case, if we have so-called shrinkage, where the same sort of a smaller box of cereal is being sold at the same price, we would reflect that as inflation.
Merci beaucoup.
thank you very much.
To the block, Monsieur Sainte-Marie for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Mr. Peterson, hello, and hello to the Statistics Canada team, those of you who are joining us online, and those of us who are listening to us from elsewhere, and those of us who are. Thank you. You do such important work. You help us make wise decisions, we legislators, especially during crises, times of crisis such as this one. Inflation is of great concern to us, and it's thanks to the data you provide us with that we're able to make wise decisions. So thanks again. Let me begin on the topic of housing. In your opening remarks, Mr. Peterson, you reminded us that 6.6% in February is the growth in housing costs, the largest in over 30 years. So I have a series of questions about that. Do you feel that this trend will continue through March and the coming months? Second, what are the specifics for Quebec? Thank you. We're not necessarily able to forecast, but when we calculate our price estimates for housing, we include not only housing, but the cost of purchased housing as well. So interest rates impact that on the CPI as well. Perhaps I could ask Heidi Erdl or Taylor Mitchell to provide some response to your second question.
The numbers specifically for Quebec shelter. We can certainly get that to you. I'm not sure if Ms. Mitchell has it.
Merci pour la question. I will.
Thank you for the question.
I can certainly get back to you with specifics, but what I can tell you right now is that the situation for housing in Quebec is certainly reflecting a number of the same pressures that we're seeing throughout the rest of the country, particularly around the Montreal area. But we can certainly get back to you with specifics. Thank you.
OK. Merci à vous trois pour votre réponse.
Thank you to all of you for your answer. Much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing what you were able to send me. In the same line of thinking, I'd like to ask you some questions about the quality of the data you use for shelter in general and for Quebec in particular. Do you think that the data you're using is of sufficient quality? And as a secondary question, are you able to measure the impact of the exaggerated prices, we're seeing when condos and houses are sold, we the sort of blind auctioning where people are offering even more than the price that the seller is asking. Is this something you measure?
Okay. On pense que
We do think that the quality of the data we gather in Quebec allows us to make reliable calculations, but I can turn to Ms. Ertl for the remainder of the answer.
Merci pour.
Thank you for the question.
So I believe you're referring to the bidding process. So when a unit sells for more than the list price, this would be captured when we include our resale housing prices in the shelter component of owned accommodation. It appears in a couple of components. That would be the mortgage interest, as well as the real estate commission fees and the land transfer tax. So we are basing all of the resale housing prices that are feeding the shelter component on transaction prices, not list prices. In the case of new homes, the price that we are getting for the new house price index, which of course feeds into a different component, the replacement costs, are provided by builders. So these are new homes that builders are building, and they provide the prices for us. In those cases, the price is the list price of the new home and may not always necessarily be a transaction price, depending on whether they are selling upfront before houses are being built or after the fact on MLS. So there is a bit of a mix, but I can emphasize Mr. Peterson's point that the quality of the data for shelter in Quebec, as well as all of the other provinces and territorial capitals, is of the highest quality. In most cases, it's transaction prices, all coming from administrative data.
Très bien, merci beaucoup. Comme je vois que mon temps...
Thank you very much. I see that my time is rapidly running out, so I'll put a question about a totally different topic. Mr. Peterson, would you say that currently the impact of the war in Ukraine has basically already been included in February's inflation, or do you think that that impact will be seen even more heavily in the statistics of upcoming months? When we consider all our economic indexes and bring in the problem in Ukraine, we see that it certainly has an impact on global commodities.
In our consumer price index, we're tracking this through the movement through sort of our price indices through a number of different, our industrial product price index or raw material price index. Ukraine, I think, is the world's largest producer of neon, for instance. So as that is an important input into the production of computer chips, there are supply chain effects. That's certainly not the only supply chain effect in the world right now, but we are keeping track of what's happening outside of our borders as well as what's happening domestically.
Merci, MP Saint-Marie. And now we'll hear from the NDP and MP Blakey for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I know you were answering that question under some time constraint. I don't know if there's anything you had hoped to add, and if so, I'd welcome you to add to your reflections on how and when we might be able to see the effects of the war in Ukraine in the consumer price index or other data that bear on Canada's economic forecasting.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, I think we for sure that's had sort of an impact on what we're seeing sort of at the pump. And, insofar as gasoline's an input into sort of a whole range of other things, we're starting to see that as well. Those are my initial thoughts.
I wanted to follow up on something that came out of testimony the other day here at committee, which was just on the question of how housing costs are incorporated into the CPI, that we might end up actually seeing, as interest rates go up, even if that results in a decline in housing prices over the medium term, that we might find ourselves in a position where, while housing prices are coming down, housing prices drive up the CPI because the monthly costs increase. And I think, and I respect that there's no perfect model for how to try and incorporate housing data into the CPI, but I'm wondering less on the question of that data and more on the question of, how do you think, and what role is there for for folks like us or for Stats Canada to try and help explain to Canadians in a moment like that why it is that as housing prices are decreasing, they're seeing a corresponding increase in housing cost within the CPI.
Thank you for the question. I think I don't think that you can look at any single economic indicator and say that that is the panacea that describes absolutely everything. As I described in my opening remarks, the Consumer Price Index aims to measure how much it costs to consumers to own a home, right? So for sure, you'd include mortgage interest costs. For sure, you would, some aspects of the price of the house is going to figure into it. There are other price indices, or our residential property price index, which measures the purchase price of a house. And that would be the appropriate tool or the proper index to use if you're taking a look at, the prices that consumers are facing when purchasing a home. But similarly, I would take a look at the national balance sheet accounts to take a look at overall household indebtedness and take a look at the mortgage debt that's being taken on by homes. In the national balance sheet accounts, I'd also take a look at changes in household wealth over time. So if to develop a comprehensive picture, the CPI is really developed for two things. One is to be a means to sort of escalate, things like cost of living increases in contracts and stuff like that. And the second one is a tool to help inform monetary policy. But if you want that broader narrative on kind of the issues facing Canadians, I don't think that we can narrow it down to a single indicator.
The CPI does a pretty good job of telling us where we've gotten to. I think there's a lot of interest at this table and elsewhere in trying to figure out where we're heading. I'm wondering what other data Statistics Canada publishes that you would point us to in order to give us, or in order to look for signs that some relief may be coming on certain, within certain aspects of the economy, or indicators that might show that in so many months' time we might look forward to seeing a decrease in the Consumer Price Index.
Yep. While Statistics Canada is not in the business of forecasts, I think it is worthwhile to take a look at sort of what's happening along supply chains. I think over the course of the pandemic, we've seen that every product and every service has its own story. And if you wanted to take a look at sort of new housing, for instance, I would take a look at the construction price index and how that is changing. I take a look at the material inputs that go into the construction of a house, like lumber costs, and see how that's changing. Looking for the right word here, but one aspect of kind of the past 12 months is that we've seen sort of different commodities really kind of face different stories. The description of kind of the pathway for telecommunications, for instance, is one where again, telecommunication service providers have provided kind of more data for not that much or less, not as much money. So the overall sort of price goes down. So it's really kind of decomposing, I think, kind of the value chains and those supply chains to understand what's happening upstream.
Very much.
Okay. Thank you, MP Blakey. Members, we're moving into our second round, and we're starting with MP Chambers for the Conservatives for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our officials. Mr. Peterson, it's nice to see you, and your colleagues today. Thank you for coming back for a very important study. I have, I hope, to get to 5 questions, and if we could spend 30 to 45 seconds on in responses, that would be very helpful. I'd like to augment my colleagues' request in the first round with respect to methodology, it would be helpful for this committee, or at least for me in my role here, to look at what the inflation rate would have been in 2000 using the 2000 methodology, 1990, and 1980. So if we could do that, I think that would help us with an apples-to-apples comparison when we look backward. Is that something that would be available?
We'll provide that to the committee. Again, I would sort of caution that you know, over time, you know, sort of household consumption patterns change. There's some products that may have been sold in the past that are no longer being sold, so we wouldn't have a price for that product. Similarly,
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that, and certainly would any caveats that would go along with it as well. We had a great exchange last time on used cars, and I appreciate that there's some work being done on this, as well as appliances, as you noted in your opening. Scotiabank has predicted, or at least suggested, that by the summer, this will push, if we include used cars, will push the inflation rate to about 8%. Is that around what you would expect, given your kind of back-of-the-envelope math at this point, or are you at a position to disclose that today?
Well, we'll have a working paper out shortly, but I would be surprised if I mean, we currently do have used cars in the CPI. The weight of used cars in the basket is less than 2%. And so they're in the basket. Currently, we're using the price of new cars as a proxy for the price of used cars. You know.
Okay. Well, I mean, we'll look forward to the working paper. We'll certainly look forward to the working paper. The Bank of Canada provided to this committee an assumption or a finding that the carbon tax added about 0.4% to the inflation rate year over year in January. Do you agree with that number?
We haven't done an evaluation. That's why I wouldn't be qualified to say.
We did talk about housing prices and recognize there's a bunch of different ways to include this in CPI. One of the things we could look at would be disposable income of the household and how much is going to shelter just in and of itself. I'm curious as to if you've done any studies, or can you point to any information on kind of the health of discretionary spending in a household, or perhaps maybe the government has asked you to look at this with respect to housing in particular, how much of disposable income is going to shelter?
We have done sort of a fair bit of work tracking the household over the course of the pandemic. I can tell you that over the course of the pandemic, we've seen I guess we've seen kind of sort of household wealth increasing considerably. When we take a look at sort of distribution sort of across income quintiles, we've seen kind of of sort of gaps between the highest quartile and lowest quartile. Through the national balance sheet accounts, we do have data on sort of how mortgages have changed over the course of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. If there's relevant studies to that respect that are public or available, if you would forward those to the committee, we would appreciate that. I noticed one of your recent findings or releases, a record number of Canadians permanently fled the country in Q4, which is the most we've seen leave the country since the 1970s. Do you have that information broken down by age?
I'm sorry, my area of responsibility is economic statistics, so I'm not intimately familiar with that study.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind as a takeaway, if it's available, there was a record number of Canadians leave the country since the 1970s in Q4 of this year, and I would be very interested in the age category breakdown, because I think my hypothesis would be that you'll find that more younger people are leaving the country for other opportunities and lower costs of living elsewhere. I mean, we asked young people to stay home and be good citizens for 2 years, which they did, and we're all very thankful for that. And they've reemerged to an economy that looks very different and to a housing situation that looks completely unattainable. And so I would be very interested into, seeing some more findings on why people are leaving the country. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. Now we'll hear from or questions from the Liberals. MP Zarowitz for 5 minutes.
Thank you so Much, Mr. Chair, and a huge thanks to Stats Canada for joining us today. The service you provide is invaluable, and so thank you so much for your service to our country. I always like to remind myself, and sometimes when it feels like it's funny, like there's been so much that's changed over the last few years, and we're living in such unpredictable times that sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. One of my favorite economic historians is a Columbia University professor by the name of Adam Tooze. And he just wrote a book by the name of Shutdown. And he said that with this pandemic, and in the first half of 2020 alone, 95% of the world's economy suffered a simultaneous contradiction. He says that's never happened before. He said 3 billion adults were either furloughed from their jobs or try to work from home. He said that's also never happened before. He said more than 1.5 billion young people had their schooling interrupted. And then he also said that the sum of lost earnings just in the first 6 months of the pandemic was a US $10 trillion, so more than a tenth of the global GDP. And the reason I state that is because sometimes when I'm reading about updates, so we received an update of the CPI index February 2022, and I know there's been some increases, which is historic in the last 30 years. But what I also like sort of understanding is making sure that I'm thinking about it in the context of what's actually happening now. Would it be fair to say that right now we are living in fairly unprecedented times, or at the very least, that the situation that we currently find ourselves in hasn't occurred in probably about 100 years?
I can't talk about the last 100 years. I can tell you about the 30 years that I've worked at Statistics Canada, and I can tell you that we haven't been through kind of an economic period like this.
And it seems like two of my colleagues have asked for an apples-to-apples comparison of 30 years ago and the CPI versus today. I would ask if that is provided that there's a couple of other elements that are added. From my perspective, I think we should also bring in the unemployment rate. So what is the unemployment rate at that point as well as the global economic context. I think it's important if we're comparing apples to apples, we're not looking just at the CPI numbers, but we're understanding the context that it's in, and also another big indicator that we look at, which is the employment numbers. That would be great. Would that be okay? Thank you. My next question is, so today you've released some new data showing that the 8th month of consecutive growth of Canada's GDP, but we've also seen a strong recovery in Canada's jobs with over 337,000 jobs gained in February, representing 112% of the jobs lost at the peak of the pandemic. Can you tell us how these strong gains in GDP and jobs interact with inflation?
A number of different ways. There are a number of things that we're keeping track of. When you take a look at kind of the employment numbers, for sure we've been keeping a track of how employment has been changing kind of over the course of the pandemic and sort of the gains that we've been seeing in recent months. We've been paying very close attention to the impact of that on the wage rate, and you know, the way, I don't have the number immediately in front of me, but you know, wage rates are going up. So we're taking a look at kind of the difference, if you will, between sort of changes to the wage rate and changes in inflation, insofar as labor is an input. The increases in GDP, again, I would argue it's the same sort of thing that we're seeing in CPI. Every industry is a slightly different story, and every industry is being affected by slightly different things. The changes that we've been seeing in the transportation sector have been largely affected by kind of the available, people traveling, for instance. Changes in the accommodation and food services sector.
Sorry to interrupt. I just have one more question before we go on. So thank you for that. Can you just speak to whether you have any data that shows how the pandemic supports that we provided may have prevented labor market scarring?
To my knowledge, nothing particularly on labor market scarring as such. I would, though, point to the national balance sheet accounts, which does take a look at how household finances, and we've broken that down by sort of income and wealth quintile.
And again, just because he cut out, if that's okay, because the translators can't hear it. Last.
Oh, I'm sorry?
If you could just repeat that last sentence of that answer.
Well, certainly. Yeah, we have data from the national balance sheet accounts, which take a look at how household wealth has changed over the course of the pandemic. Savings rates, disposable income, and we've broken that down by income and wealth quintile.
And now we'll hear from the bloc and MP Sainte-Marie for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Peterson, in the conclusion of your opening remarks, you do say that you are concerned about a possible rise in the cost of a number of foodstuffs, given that Ukraine, for example, exports a good deal of cereals and vegetable oils. When we measure transactions on the food market these days, we do see that wheat, it costs a good deal more and will cost more. The prices of next September, for which the crops of this summer will be purchased, are already known. Do you use this type of statistic? Certainly.
We keep very close track of sort of what's being planted, and throughout the growing season, we keep track of what we expect crop yield to be by commodity. Canada, of course, is only one producer of these grains, so you'd also have to consider the production from sort of other global producers. But Canada is a sufficiently large producer in a number of these commodities that they do have an impact on world prices.
Okay, merci.
Very well, thank you. What do you think the best early indicators would be for us to watch to be able to anticipate what inflation will be in future? I hope that's clear. Again, we're not in the business of inflation forecasts, but we do have a number of products which help us measure supply chain costs.
In the raw material price index.
And these indicators do provide us with data.
They're up the supply chain.
Merci. Merci.
MP Sainte-Marie, and now to MP Blakey from the NDP for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I know in your earlier remarks you had mentioned that the CPI really is a composite. It doesn't reflect any one particular individual situation. It depends on many factors, the extent to which CPI maps well onto a particular individual or group of individuals' experience. Certainly one of the things that I've heard a lot over the 6.5 years that I've been a member of Parliament is from seniors who really feel that CPI increases to their public pension don't match the cost pressures that they experience. I'm wondering if there's been any work done, if you think it would be possible or indeed advisable, if you'd be prepared to go that far, to have something like a Canada Seniors Price Index that might be a better tool for increases to seniors' pension income and other income support benefits that would better represent cost pressures faced specifically by seniors.
Thank you for the question, and you're exactly right. When we take a look at the basket for the Consumer Price Index, it reflects sort of all expenses by all Canadians kind of aggregated together, and it's not going to be very often that a senior won't necessarily face daycare expenses or tuition expenses. So it is a composite. in order for us to do something like that, it would require us to have sort of very detailed information on kind of what seniors are purchasing. So we'd have to construct kind of a basket of consumption for seniors. What we have done, though, is we have produced a personal inflation calculator, which allows you to enter into kind of the website, essentially your own pattern of expenses, and you could produce your own sort of individual CPI. That's something that we've done in order to try to allow Canadians to kind of better see themselves in the data that we're producing.
Would that tool or some other method provide a kind of, if there were a campaign around trying to get a critical mass of seniors to use that tool, constructing a seniors basket that could be used for seniors' income benefits and pensions, so that they're not faced with a CPI that, one of the downward factors within the CPI right now is childcare, and as you rightly point out, that's not a factor for many seniors, to the extent that some, cost of internet and a few other things has gotten a little bit lower. Also, something that is maybe disproportionately, not beneficial to seniors who don't necessarily avail themselves of those things as much. So, do we have the means to be able to create a seniors basket, or is there infrastructure missing in order to be able to do that?
I don't think there's infrastructure missing. I think there's data that's missing, and it would be kind of understanding what the consumption patterns are of seniors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Blakey. Moving into the Conservatives, MP Fast for 5 minutes.
Mr. Peterson, I want to go back to the discussion you had with my colleague, Mr. Albus. I just want to be very clear about what we're asking. Given the fact that we talk about inflation being the highest in 30 or 31 years, obviously there must be a comparator of apples to apples to allow you to make a statement like that. And I'm wondering, the basket of goods that you use to make a comparison like that, is it equivalent?
The basket of goods that we use, we change the basket of goods on a periodic basis in order to reflect the change in consumption patterns of Canadians. If I take as an example what we faced early on in the pandemic, early on in the pandemic, a critique of the CPI was that with the closing of stores and the unavailability of services, that the CPI basket didn't properly reflect the consumption patterns of Canadians, so there was a bias. At that point, we worked with the Bank of Canada to get kind of updated consumption data in order to come up with a sort of an alternate CPI sort of basket to reflect kind of that change in consumption pattern. When we did that analysis, in the end, we found that there was no significant change as a result of kind of the change in the basket over the course of the pandemic. So
are you saying that when you make a statement about current inflation rates versus historical rates, that there is an equivalency there that is fair and that properly reflects the changes that have happened, but also properly reflects a proper comparison between two different times, between, say, the 1990s or the 1980s and today?
I would say the answer is yes. It's common practice among national statistical offices to update kind of the consumption basket in CPIs, and we are no different.
Asking you to do is to provide us, either now or it's probably going to be in writing, an analysis of what the inflation rate would have been back in 1980, the early 1980s, compared to today, and as closely as possible using an apples-to-apples approach. If you could provide our committee with that.
Absolutely. But again, I would caution that there are some commodities that were sold in the 1980s that are no longer sold now, right? So if there were VHS tapes that were in the basket in the 1980s, of course, there are no streaming services that were available back then either.
I understand that. Now, you had also mentioned that there were a number of different factors that are inflation. The war in Ukraine was, of course, the key one. There was transportation prices, a bad year for food production. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of others. One is taxes. When a municipality raises property taxes, when a province raises the property transfer tax, when a federal government raises excise taxes or carbon taxes or income taxes, does that drive inflation, and does that factor into your CPI calculation?
It depends upon the nature of the tax. Maybe if I can turn to Ms. Hurtle.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does depend on the nature of the tax, but most taxes are included. The product prices and taxes are included. So we know, for example, within each province and territory, what the tax system structure is. Those get updated as needed. Carbon taxes, for example, we will see those as they're introduced in the CPI. So yes, those would be included, and if Taylor has anything else to add, she would be the expert on this particular topic.
So, Ms. Hurtle, you can confirm that taxes are inflationary in nature?
I can tell you that those taxes that are brought in would be included as they apply to specific prices of goods and services.
It sounds to me like you're a little reluctant to say whether they're inflationary or not, and yet you're including them in the CPI.
That's correct.
Yes.
One other question. Stimulus spending by government. That's also inflationary, correct?
I think what we've seen over the course of the pandemic is sort of household wealth has increased. We have saw a large increase in savings rates kind of across all sort of income quintiles, and that would put sort of households in a position to sort of buy more stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Be fast. That's the time, and now we're moving to MP McDonald for 5 minutes from the Liberals.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, StatsCan. Very important information that you guys provide policymakers as well. I'm going to change it up a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about large corporations relevant to trying to measure what they're doing, relevancy to, well, their profits, basically. So we've seen huge amounts in the U.S., a 25% profit gain in corporations, and in Canada it was 37% increase, I believe. And is there any way that StatsCan monitors these corporations relevant to price gouging, or we know the labor market, the labor wages and salaries are not keeping up to the prices that some of these corporations are charging? Is that somewhere, is it measured somewhere in CPI?
Not so much in CPI. We do have sort of our retail service price index, our wholesale service price index, which are essentially price indices that measure the margins that wholesalers and retailers apply to their customers. That would necessarily be consistent with price gouging in those series.
So is there any way to detect, or is that made public? I mean, we're starting to see, there's concerns when you get the President of the United States talking about asking companies not to price gouge. We have oil companies now, you're seeing the level of prices. In my home province, I know the price of fuel changed 10 times in less than 30 days. So you just kind of, what effect is that? Like, how do you measure it, or how does it become relevant to that a red flag goes up and says, hold on a second, and make it public?
If I understand your question correctly, Statistics Canada, we're never, we protect the confidentiality of the information that we obtain, so we're not in a position to sort of point to an individual company and say, you're price gouging. If I take a look at sort of the data that we have available that indicate sort of where we're seeing prices happen or where margins are increasing, again, I'd point to the retail service price index, the wholesale service price index as sources of that information. And
the end of the answer, but I'm going to move on really quickly. We've heard from other guests that predatory lending could be contributing to CPI. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that and if you have any information to share with us.
Maybe if I can turn to Ms. Ertl.
Mr. Chair, could I ask the member to clarify that question?
Is high-risk individuals are getting loans, and I mean, at the present or leading up to the pandemic, and we're just wondering what contribution is that on? They call it, we call it predatory lending, and I'm just wondering if is there a measurement tool that you use to try to determine if that's the case?
I don't believe so. We are measuring the transactions that are occurring. If we're talking about mortgage lending, as an example, we would be taking into account all of the new mortgages that are initiated in a given month. We do not assess or analyze whether, we don't have any information to do that, whether that's a high-risk loan or not.
Quicker result to the question could be, what's the level of bankruptcies and insolvencies over the past 2 or 3 years? Has it increased or decreased?
So that's a different question. That's not related at all to the CPI. I'm not sure if we have some information on our business conditions.
The sort of information from bankruptcies are published by ISED.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, MP McDonald. And members, we are moving to our third round. And we have MP Lawrence, who's virtual today. And hi, MP Lawrence. Yeah, you're up for 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to borrow heavily from a friend of our Finance Committee, Professor Sylvain Charbois, and in a recent article that he's written. In his article, he states that on the StatsCan website that you will be refreshing or creating a brand new database for food coming forward. And can you confirm that that's the case?
Well, this is outside of the CPI. So the CPI remains unchanged. We have for some time produced information on the average prices of food products. In the past, we published a national table and a provincial table. We are going to move those two tables together into a single product.
And my understanding is that you're actually going to be eliminating from the website and for public consumption the 25 years of data that is collected, meaning you will no longer be able to do year-over-year studies. And it seems like a bit of an odd time in food prices.
Absolutely not. We have no intention of removing any data from our website, nor have we ever indicated that we would.
It said on your website, posted a note to readers at the very bottom of its monthly consumer price index report that it would be removing this data. Is that not true?
We will no longer update the old table, but we'll archive the old table and the data will be publicly available.
But you won't be able to compare the new data because it's from a different grouping of foods or different types of foods to the old data.
I'll ask Ms. Ertl to talk about kind of the specifics of the changes that are made. We're going to make.
Wouldn't it? Sorry, no, but that's fine. But you will not be updating the old basket, which will eliminate the ability to do a year-over-year comparison at the time when we have one that's from the highest food prices, right?
The CPI basket remains unchanged. We're still covering 178 food commodities, and it'll be continuous over time. So we'll be able to go back in time and make comparisons for those products. The average price table or the average prices are the average price of a product. If you're making comparisons of what's happening over time, we advise people to use the consumer price index as opposed to sort of that selection of, that collection of selected prices, average prices.
But my point remains the same in the fact that on this food table, you will not be able to do the year-over-year comparison. And this is in striking contrast to your counterparts in the United States and other countries where they've actually kept the two tables going. They've got the new one that rightfully reflects perhaps some of the more modern examples of diet, but allows you to also continue to track on the old one, presuming everything's in stage, it's a matter of updating. Why would you not just go ahead and keep updating that on the food table so that people, when we're facing record inflation, and people in my riding, quite frankly, are having a difficulty time affording food, that academics and others who study this would not have the ability to continue to understand and fully monitor the increases in food prices?
We would advise that if what you want to track are increases in food prices, that the 178 commodities in the consumer price index be used for making those comparisons. Because if you're doing that, then you're comparing apples and apples. You're making sure that the size of the cereal box is same in both periods.
Okay, I'll move on to a different topic here. You said earlier that in response to my colleagues' questions that the deficits do lead to inflation, would you just care to expand on that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
You said earlier in response to my colleague Mr. Fast's question that the increased deficit spending was creating inflation, and your exact words were that it put more money into Canadians' pockets, and therefore they spent more, which created more inflation. So you had more money chasing fewer goods, which was creating inflation.
I was pointing to data where we have hard numbers. We do not have sort of data. When we take a look at sort of the composition of inflation, what causes inflation, largely our analysis focused on sort of supply chain issues. The data that I was referring to were data from kind of the national balance sheet accounts, where we're taking a look at the sort of the change in the wealth of households sort of over time, and on a disaggregated basis by sort of income quintile and by wealth quintile.
Yeah, so more money chasing less goods equals higher inflation, and has been the case in the 5 worst cases of inflation, where you have higher deficit spending, and which creates more money chasing less goods, which creates inflation. One other thing that you added, you said with respect that taxes are inflationary as well, and could I ask for for StatsCan to table with our committee a report showing the inflationary impact of all the tax increases over the last 7 years?
If I can clarify what Mr. Ertl said, we don't do an analysis of the impact of taxes on inflation. We do include sort of the value of a tax in kind of the pricing of a commodity. So an excise tax will be included in the price of whatever good is being sold.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. What I'm asking you, though, is to break those numbers down.
MP Lawrence, we are moving to the Liberals and MP Sorbara for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon to the folks at Stats Canada. I do want to say that I very much enjoy reading the daily publication that's put out on the website. I know this morning's publication was gross domestic product for Canada. I think it was for February, where we saw the Canadian economy continue to outperform expectations and continue to grow as we continue to fight the pandemic but recover from it and deal with global events. So it's good to see the Canadian economy continue to grow, and it's now larger than it was pre-pandemic. My first question, and I just want to ask about response rates. And I know it's not directly dealing directly with the inflation measure, but your response rates in calculating, also you released the SEPH survey today as well. Interesting to see that. I wish it was a little more up to date instead of a lagged indicator. But how are the response rates from measuring the economic indicators that we have from Stats Canada?
It largely depends upon kind of the survey that we're talking about. Essentially, it depends on the source. In many cases, we're using administrative data in order to drive forward an estimate, in which case, we're getting kind of a full census of all activity. In other surveys, if I'm thinking about the monthly survey of manufacturers, the monthly retail trade survey, we're taking a look at response rates in kind of the 80% range, 85% range, and those are the sort of the economic production surveys that feed into GDP. GDP itself is a composite measure, so it's bringing in data from sort of a range of different sources. So it's not possible to say there's sort of a single response rate for GDP.
In terms of calculating your LFS number, labor force survey number, the response rates obviously during COVID a little more challenging, but have they come back to better numbers?
I would have to get back to you on specific response rates for the labor force survey. I don't have those on the top of my head.
Okay, no problem. I do want to add that, just to put it on the record, that one of the bank's economists stated that Canada's economy is on a tear with growth surpassing BOC estimates. So it's great to see the Canadian economy continue to outperform. Quick question in terms of measuring inflation. As someone who has studied economics at the master's level and had an opportunity to do a PhD or go work on Wall Street, and I decided to go work on Wall Street, the sort of not controversy, but the estimation of using hedonic pricing, if I go back in my memory. Can you sort of comment on that in terms of the preferred pricing measure that StatsCan uses for inflation, for inflationary estimates?
Again, it depends upon the commodity. We do use hedonic pricing. Maybe I can turn to Ms. Ertl to give us examples of where we do that.
Thanks for the question. Yes, hedonic pricing is used in our quality adjustment process. So Mr. Peterson addressed that particularly with respect to items that change frequently. So we use hedonic quality adjustment for things like electronics and computers, smartphones, for example. It's really the most robust way to ensure that we are taking into account quality changes over time to these types of commodities and to maintain sort of that consistent product over time.
Because the use of that hedonic pricing when it comes to measuring CPI, because there's obviously the intangible, the qualitative factor when you look at a product and price adjustments there, does that tend to when you rebase it, does that tend to drive up the inflation number or to just make it a more apples to apples comparison?
Exactly. It's the objective is to ensure that it's consistent, the product over time, so apples to apples. There is a study that was released on the impact of various quality adjustment methods that we can include in a follow-up package.
I would, if I can just get that flag, that would be great. Peter, do I have another more time? 45 seconds. Oh, 45 seconds. Okay. And in terms of the inflation measurement that Stats Canada uses, Statistics Canada uses, how often do you evaluate that versus what other countries use, specifically versus what they use on the United States, what comes out of the Federal Reserve and other sources in the ECB?
We work closely with other national statistical offices and with international organizations to sort of share methods and look for best practices. There are international fora for this. Under the UN umbrella, there is the Ottawa Group on Price Statistics. Also work done under the umbrella of the IMF.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarbara. We have now the block, MP Sainte-Marie, for 2.5 minutes. MP Sainte-Marie.
Oui, bon, merci, j'attendais qu'on m'ouvre le micro.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just waiting to ensure that my microphone was on. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Peterson, some economists, including Nouriel Roubini, state that given the unusual international situation that we're now in, there is a risk of stagflation, at least in the West. So then now we're talking about inflation data. Mr. Sorbara mentioned economic growth in Canada. At StatsCan, are there any indexes about real growth that lead you to think that growth might slow down either across the entire economy or for specific sectors or specific provinces? We're not in the business of forecasting and creating forecasts.
release indicates the fourth straight monthly increase in GDP over a period of where we've seen increasing inflation. So we haven't hit that period of stagflation yet. If it is to occur, this is certainly something that we are monitoring and will continue to track.
OK, merci beaucoup. C'est rassurant.
Thank you very much. That's reassuring. And that's what, among others, the Bank of Canada governor was telling us recently. Another issue of concern to me, I was asking you questions about the price of shelter in Quebec compared to its price across Canada, but I'm also concerned by price gaps between various regions. For example, far from Montreal, in rural areas compared to Montreal. Of course, real estate costs a good deal more in Montreal at present, but the regions are catching up. Do you measure the differences between rural areas, let's say in Quebec, compared to cities, and have you seen any change there recently?
Ms. Ertl?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Based on the census metropolitan areas, and those will appear in the various housing price indexes that are produced in other programs. Within the CPI, we also report and publish statistics based on the census metropolitan area. We do, with, for example, food data and some other components, attempt to ensure that the coverage includes outlying areas, for example, grocery stores. But for shelter, the data that we have relies mainly on CMA.
Merci.
MP Sainte-Marie and now MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Without making light of the seriousness of the issues that we're talking about today, one is tempted to ask how many staff Statistics Canada thinks it may have to hire in order to satisfy the requests coming out of the Finance Committee. I won't ask the question because I appreciate it may take a while to calculate, and it's perhaps a question best asked under the study of the estimates later on, Mr. Chair. I did want to take a moment just to flag for you, of course, with the budget date having been announced now, that we're going to lose our meeting on April 7th, where we had agreed to discuss a little bit of committee business. So I wonder if we might be able to have some time set aside on Monday at the end of our meeting just to try and get sorted on what we intend to do when we come back. I know we had been scheduled to talk a little bit about the Emergencies Act study that's still before the committee on Thursday the 7th. So perhaps we might start with that on the Monday after we return. But just to have a little bit of time to discuss some of those things, I think would be useful for the committee. So with thanks to our witnesses for their patience, I'll gladly pass the floor on to the next MP for their question.
Okay, thank you, MP Blakey. And just on that, yes, we are going to not have our meeting the day of the budget, so we'll be listening to the budget in the chamber. And so to then our Monday, that Monday meeting to this upcoming Monday meeting to be able to allot some time to that discussion. I'm looking at members. Yeah, it seems like everybody is in consent with that. So we are moving now to. Okay. So I think MP Blakey, you ceded your time, correct? MP Blakey, you've ceded your time for now. Okay, so right, and so we're moving to the Conservatives, and I do have MP Albus, and as you know, MP Albus has always shared with me that we always say allotted time, but it's not a lot of time. So we'll and thank you for that, MP Albus.
Appreciate
but
that,
you do
Mr.
have your
Chair.
allotted 5 minutes.
And I just have to say again to Mr. Peterson and his team, thank you for being here. Certainly, just with some of the announcements that are in your notes here today from your opening statements, I would like to actually maybe invite you to come back to talk more about some of the initiatives as they turn out. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2022 Q1 Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. Now, Mr. Chair, I would hope that this would be seen as key to CPI because eventually these inputs get put on. And so maybe if I could ask Mr. Peterson or any of your team just to kind of talk about some of the key top business obstacles that your survey found.
Sure. I guess our last iteration of the business conditions survey was first quarter of 2022. And we do this survey in cooperation with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And when we ask businesses on kind of the biggest obstacles that they faced, the biggest obstacle that they identified was rising cost of inputs, including labor, capital, energy, and raw materials. And that was expressed as an obstacle by over half of Canadian businesses.
When we talk about some of these business pressures, particularly supply chain, particularly input costs, labor shortages, that all, even in some cases, some wages going up, not obviously universal, but those all do have an inflationary component to it. Do businesses believe that they're going to have to pass a lot of those extra costs on to their customers?
Yep, we did ask businesses whether or not they intended to raise their prices over the next 3 months. And our survey indicated that over 1/3, about 36% of businesses expected to raise their prices in that period.
Okay. Yes, that would contribute to inflation, would it not?
Yes.
So, a quick question. One thing I've been hearing from consumers is the difficulty they are having to purchase, appliances that like dishwashers and laundry machines, washing machines, dryers, etc. Do you track that? Is it similar to cars where you track those things?
We don't track how many appliances are demanded by consumers, but this business conditions survey does ask about whether or not firms have had difficulties in applying in getting supplies themselves. And we are seeing that businesses are experiencing difficulty in acquiring inputs, products, or supplies, both domestically and internationally.
Okay. Because I am hearing from people that are saying that they're having trouble, anything that has microchips in it, automobiles, washers, dryers, dishwashers, and the used market is going up. So you had mentioned to Mr. Chambers that there were going to be some changes in how you report on used cars. That will also be factored in April, won't it?
We're looking at in April, we'll release a paper explaining what we're going to do. Our plan is to introduce changes with the basket update this summer.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But to be clear, the change we're going to make is not the inclusion of used cars into the CPI because they're already in the basket, but simply a change in the method used to track the movement in prices for used cars.
Okay. That will be helpful. Thank you.
Now we're going to the Liberals, MP Chattel, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, my colleague MP Blakey, I, as a public servant in finance before, when we receive questions, of course, from committee, it's a priority, and so when some requests are requiring extensive amount of work, and we put aside other very important work, and in the labor shortage period, I'm really invite my colleague to be careful what we ask. And so my question, Mr. Peterson, is how do you have what's your estimate of the time it will take for Statistics Canada to engage in those studies that we are requesting to you today?
I think the big challenge will be in taking a look at sort of old baskets. I think the biggest challenge is that there were commodities that were sold in the 1980s that may not be sold now, like VHS cassette tapes. Similarly, there are commodities that are sold now that never, didn't exist in the 80s, such as sort of streaming services. I honestly couldn't give you an assessment of the time it would take to sort of come up with those estimates.
Okay, thank you. My question is about the projection of the inflation. I've heard different studies, just in the OECD also, they have projection that the situation would stabilize in their own projection. I wondered if you have any projection for Canada. Do we have reason to be hopeful?
At Statistics Canada, we don't forecast where necessarily inflation is going to go. What we focus on really is sort of taking a look at what's happening, by taking a look at those individual commodities and what's happening in supply chains. There are a whole range of external factors that could affect inflation over the next 6 months to a year, and we're really not in a position to kind of do that sort of simulation analysis and sort of guess where inflation is going to be.
Okay, thank you. And about the comparison of Canada with other countries, what do you note from the key problem that we are facing globally? We talked a little bit earlier about oil and gas. We talk about commodity, housing in various cities around the world. Any global, we talk about the war in Eastern Europe. We talk about the gas production in the Middle East. But we haven't talked yet about climate change. How do you see climate change affecting, and how can you measure that?
Climate change, I see as kind of a longer term thing. If I take a look at what's happened over the course of the past year, the droughts that we experienced in North America, for certain, had an impact on the weather-related event of the drought, right? For sure had an impact on sort of crop yields both in Canada and the United States, and sort of severely affected sort of the commodities that are sort of grown in those areas. Insofar as Canada and the United States being important kind of producers of those grains, then of course you're going to see sort of an impact on consumer prices.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And I have 1 minute left.
Just wanted to say that I have tabled a motion on the green finance for future discussion on our plan to study inflation. So really, really happy to table this for further discussion in this committee. Thank you.
MP Chatel, and I guess that was sent to the clerk?
Yes,
yes?
it was.
Okay, and distributed already? Okay, great. Yeah. Look at that. You're so efficient, guys. That's awesome. Members, witnesses, we're moving into our last round, our fourth round, looking at the time, as I usually do, for all the parties. I will divide it evenly. I'm looking at about 4 minutes for each of the parties. We are starting with the Conservatives, and we have MP Lawrence up for those 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify the food, because I don't know if the viewers would have gotten a clear idea. And I'll just quote from Monsieur Charbois' article. He says, over the next few weeks, the database containing the average prices of 52 products sold in Canada grocery stores will be completely removed by Statistics Canada. You're not denying that, right?
I am, absolutely. We're not going to remove the database.
So that's incorrect.
We are not going to remove the database.
Okay. Will you be updating that database from this point forward?
Maybe if I can turn to Ms. Ertl to describe exactly what we're going to be doing with that average price table.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to clarify. This, first of all, the average price table is, as Mr. Peterson mentioned, separate from the CPI. So I want to make sure that all the members and the viewers understand that. There are absolutely no changes to the way we measure or publish the food indexes as part of the CPI. For the average prices table, we are consolidating 2 tables so that viewers and data users will have national average prices as well as provincial average prices in one convenient place. The quality of the data will be enhanced because we will be drawing from our scanner data, which is the point of sale data from 21 grocery chains across the country. To the extent possible, we will attempt to include historical information for the new series being brought in, but there will definitely not be any removal of the old database. Methodological notes will be included to ensure that users can interpret and use the data in the proper format.
Right.
And I'd like to mention that we have been fully transparent about this change, first announcing it in February, announcing it again in March, and directly to our stakeholders and data users.
And thank you
via
for
email.
that. Thank you for that. I'm not in any way meaning to criticize the new series, but the old series will not be updated. Is that correct?
At this moment, that is the plan. It's basically because of the methodological differences, okay? As things evolve and we obtain new data sources, it will be important to focus on the new data sources and not mix concepts.
But you could have two different streams, and that's what they've done in the United States on similar food tables, is my understanding. It is possible to have those two systems, and this would give us some better historical in the times when we're experiencing historical food prices. So that would be a suggestion to you.
Again, it would be our advice that if you're taking a look at food inflation or the change in food prices, that users focus on the consumer price index itself.
But clearly you had the food table for a reason, right?
We provided the food table for users that wanted to take a look at the sort of average price of a particular commodity. I would suggest that the average food price table is not the best tool to take a look at to track food price changes over time.
Not the aggregate, but if you're looking for a particular commodity in a time when those food prices are going up, taking the data off, I think would not be not, at least from this observers, would not be a great way to go. I do want to move to when we look at the inflation. You notice a couple things that have decreased, including car insurance, but overall, through the vast majority of the categories, we're seeing an increase in prices. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would I be accurate in saying that perhaps points to a more systemic issue? Oh, sorry. Am I over?
Times because we speak over each other, but that is, as going back to MP Albus, a lot of time is not a lot of time. And now we're moving to the Liberals, and we do have MP Zerowitz up for 4 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And just because, just in case I fall out of my, I end my allotted time or a lot of time very early. I just want to also indicate that I also put on a notice. A motion on notice for possible future study. Who knows if we're going to be able to get to any of these, but it's good to have these on future notice. And mine is just about strengthening the internal economy. So it's really at a time where we have such increasingly unpredictable global economic outlook, exacerbated by the geopolitical crisis. I think we've had a number of witnesses that have come before finance over the last couple of years who've indicated that if we focus on strengthening our internal economy, harmonizing our regulations, eliminating barriers that stop the free movement of people, goods, and services, then we would actually have far more productive economic growth in Canada. So I just want to say that is a notice on motion. Thanks so much, Mr. Chair.
Sent to the clerk and
yes,
distributed?
Yes, it has been,
yes,
and
great.
already distributed. See how efficient our clerk is. I actually want to go back to a question that Ms. Chattel had asked earlier, and it was about telephone prices. And we received a wonderful response from Monsieur Peterson, which was great. Here's my thing. There's a disconnect for me, because if one of the top letters I receive in my writing is how expensive telephone services continue to be and how uncompetitive we are, and we're probably, if not the most expensive in the world in terms of telephone and cellular prices, then among the top. And so how does that square with what it is that you are reporting through your data? I understand that what you've indicated that there's been more services provided for the same price. But I'm not, that to me is a disconnect from what I'm actually hearing from the general public.
And I think that's a fair observation, right? So when we produce the consumer price index, again, we're after the measurement of kind of the same basket of goods over a period of time. And when you take a look at a telecommunication service, right, you're going to take a look at sort of a package that has so much data, so much voice, so much time, so many characteristics. I think for time. For sure, when I open my telecommunications bill, I'm not opening it and saying, "Wow, this is great." Kind of my I'm paying less. But there's a difference between sort of what households are spending on things and sort of what the price change is and what the CPI does. So a CPI is really that quality controlled basket of goods that we compare over periods, which is not to say that Canadians aren't hurting because they're paying a lot, not just for sort of telecommunication services, but also for housing, but also for food and kind of a range of other commodities.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I know that people in my riding will appreciate hearing and understanding that response. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you, MP Zerowitz. Moving to the bloc, MP Sainte-Marie for 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin with a brief comment. Of course, I much enjoyed the joke that my colleague to my right has used about how much StatsCan would mobilize resources to answer our questions. But in all seriousness, all this is to say that we recognize the quality of the work you provide us with, and it's important for this, for a democracy, and for us to have full answers to our questions. I thank you for all of that. I'd like to put my questions, this last chance I have to question you, about changing salaries. We see that inflation is higher than usual. It's a historic level of inflation, we're told. How about salaries, though? The hourly wages, for example, are they keeping up with inflation? Are we able to say that, on the average, workers will come out on the wrong end of this inflation, or have their salaries been keeping pace with inflation?
That is something that we're keeping an eye on. At this point, we haven't seen wage rates increase as fast as inflation. So, in essence, this is affecting kind of the paycheck of Canadians. But this is something that we keep an eye on. Through the labor force survey, through the survey of employment and payroll hours. For sure, we'll keep track of sort of how wages change as we move ahead.
Merci, et je pousserai un peu plus.
Thank you. And I'd like to push this a little further. Thank you for the answer so far. But at this point, given the data you now have you seen any trends when, we break down income, for example, by level of wage, of salary, top of the scale, lower down on the scale? Are you able to say that the highest paid have been able to ensure that their wages or salaries are keeping up with inflation, whereas people at other pay scales aren't able to? Or are you able to break this down at this point? I don't think that we have that sort of data yet. All right, very well, thank you. Of course, these are factors we'd like to see more about in future. So perhaps by looking at household expenses, household purchasing, you may have looked at the effects of some substitutions. For example, if, let's say, certain meats cost more now, or if their price is rising faster than that for other food products, are people substituting? And what's the effect of that? That's a good question.
Or Ms. Mitchell on whether or not we've seen anything in any of our early indicators.
Mute.
Excuse me, I was on mute. Could you please clarify the question? as I understood, you're interested in understanding whether we're seeing consumers making those substitutions?
Oui, c'est ça, tout à fait. Ça peut être.
Yes, indeed. Exactly that. It could be for food products or for other purchases. Given the statistics that you have gathered so far, are you able to see whether or not consumers are making substitutions, and if so, what sort of substitutions are they making?
We typically see the effects of substitutions when the CPI basket is updated. It will be updated this June, and it was last updated last summer. At this point, for food products, for instance, we are seeing a number of increases across the board for major food categories. So for meat, for example, we are seeing increases for beef, pork, and chicken, but we're not seeing anything at this point in the price data that indicates substitutions are being made. However, that is data that is information that will become more clear when the basket is updated and we can see how consumers are.
MP Sainte-Marie?
Oui, juste pour terminer, je tiens encore une.
Just to wind up, I would like to thank you once again, Mr. Peterson, and the team at StatsCan for all your work. You've been able to answer all my questions. Sincere thanks.
And so we are moving to the NDP, and MP Blakey will be our final questioner and MP to ask questions. So you've got 4 minutes, MP Blakey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And in the course of my parliamentary career so far, such as it's been, I think it's fair to say I've never shied away from highlighting differences and pressing on issues that I think are important, but I'm also always willing to collaborate and cooperate wherever possible across party lines. And in the course of that work, I've benefited a committee a number of times from Conservatives who've been willing to share their time with me when an issue has been of particular importance and significance to me. I know there are Conservatives on this committee who have suggested having StatsCan back already, and I would happily cede my time to a Conservative colleague who might have further questions of our witnesses today. But just before I pass the floor, I'd like to echo the thanks of Monsieur Sainte-Marie to our witnesses for being here today and for providing good answers to our questions.
MP Blakey, MP Albus.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thing how things work, Mr. Chair. So again, thanks to the presenters today. So as indicated on its website, Statistics Canada will publish on the 15th of June of this year the new weights of the basket of goods and services used to calculate the CPI. Now, the new reference period for the basket will be 2021. So to what extent have supply chain disruptions put upward pressures on prices in 2021?
I think we've the year.
MP Peterson, I think. Oh, sorry, MP Peterson. Mr. Peterson, we lost you there. We didn't catch what you just said.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think we've seen increases in prices throughout the year.
So will you need to adjust the base period to account for the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the general level of consumer prices?
We've been doing work throughout the pandemic to take a look at whether or not the different consumption patterns that Canadians have had through the pandemic had an impact on prices. We started producing an alternate sort of CPI measure based on sort of changing consumer patterns sort of earlier on in the pandemic, and we continue that exercise now. As we've done that analysis, we found that there's no considerable difference in CPI based on sort of the changing sort of consumption patterns.
It's interesting how you cite changing consumer behaviors based on COVID-19. Obviously, some people that never used where they would shop online and have it shipped direct to their home, that changed. So what extent does Statistics Canada take into account online purchases by Canadians?
If I can turn that more specific question to Ms. Ertl.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Taylor to be ready as well. We have definitely evolved in terms of our collection of price information. We are no longer solely collecting retail prices. In fact, since the onset of the pandemic, we are collecting online prices for most of our commodities. To the extent that that's captured as part of this consumer behavior, we definitely know that that has been an impact from the pandemic, and that's the reason why we are web scraping, collecting point of sale data. We also have delivery fees included in the CPI, so we do track it in that way as well. Taylor, anything to add?
I did have one last question that I forgot to ask regarding to housing, so maybe Mr. Peterson would like to answer this. Is the current treatment of owned accommodation in the Consumer Price Index still appropriate, considering that housing units are increasingly being used as an investment vehicle? That's a theme we've heard over and over, that houses aren't always used for living in.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why the methodology that we've adopted is appropriate. In the CPI, again, we're not measuring the cost Canadians face in purchasing a house. We measure the cost Canadians face in owning that house. So for sure, I think your comment is I agree completely, and I think the methodology that we use is entirely appropriate for in light of that.
Well, I appreciate that you were here for it. And just to go back to Mr. Blakey, thank you for the time. And yes, we are utilizing Statistics Canada's knowledge and expertise, and I'm sure we're putting some good people to work on some of the projects we've had, but you can't put a price on democracy. So, Mr. Chair, just want to thank the Statistics Canada, and I really do want to see what they do with some of the changes in April.
Thank you, MP Albus. And the time does go by very fast, as you can see. Statistics Canada, all of our witnesses today, that you have a lot of fans here in the room, and we understand the great work that you do, the important work that you do, how it helps government, our economy, Canadians as a whole. So we really appreciate that, and how you'll be informing our study. So much so that you've been repeat witnesses. You've come back again, and it looks like you may even want to be invited again back to our committee. Although we do know that you have a lot on your plate and a lot of important work to do. But we do want to thank you on behalf of all the members, the clerk, the analysts, the interpreters, and everybody here at committee. So thank you to our witnesses. I do want to go back, members, just to MP Blakey about that time that we're allocating to the end of our meeting on Monday in camera, because the clerk was asking me, would that be in camera? We would do that.
I'm happy with either option, Mr. Chair. So I don't have a preference.
Okay, so we'll set up that time in camera, clerk. Okay, great. Okay, shall we adjourn, members? Yes. Okay.
I swung the chair to my way of thinking.